I think that utilities, they struggle sometimes to convince politicians that they are more, prepared for energy transition than the mindset of some politicians. They are also, I know, working hard to convince that we have to be more progressive.
Hello and welcome to Energy Unplugged by Aurora. This podcast features various experts from Aurora having in-depth conversations with key industry leaders, policymakers and academics from all over the world. It explores the hottest topics across the energy market and gives a unique perspective on major energy issues.
Welcome to Energy Unplugged. I'm Hanns Koenig. I lead the consulting business of Aurora in Central Europe, and I'm also in charge of our activities in the Polish market, which gives me the pleasure today of hosting the podcast in which we cover the future of the Polish energy market, and for which I'm joined by Joanna Maćkowiak-Pandera.
Hello, Hans, and hello, everybody.
Excellent. I'm extremely grateful that Joanna agreed to be on the show this week because she's at once one of the most knowledgeable and also one of the most influential people in the Polish energy sector. She'll be telling us more about the work of the organization she leads, Forum Energii, in a second. But before that, a couple of words of introduction. Joanna holds a PhD in environmental science, and she's had a very distinguished career of almost 20 years across academia, the public sector, the private sector, and now the third sector. So she's really seen Polish energy from almost all possible angles. She used to work for the Polish Ministry of the Environment, ultimately there as the Undersecretary of State responsible for climate and environmental negotiations. She also used to work for Ørsted in Poland when it was still called DONG as their market development director. She used to work for Agora Energiewende, a German think tank on the energy transition, focusing there already on the Polish market. And then since 2016, she has founded and has been building and leading Forum Energii. So as I said, she's really extremely knowledgeable about the market, as we'll see in a moment. And she was one of the very first people working on renewables in Poland when it was still a niche topic and not kind of getting into the mainstream as it is now. So welcome and great to have you, Joanna.
Thank you very much, and thank you for this kind introduction. I think that, now I need to answer all your questions. So actually, I cannot refuse not replying to any of your questions, because otherwise people will think that I'm not as knowledgeable as you said. So I feel a little under pressure, I must say. And I can promise I do my best.
I have no doubts at all that we'll be fine. So before we talk about the market, actually, can you tell us more about Forum Energii and the role it plays in the energy transition in Poland?
Of course. So as you said, Forum Energii was formally established in 2016, but basically we operate a little longer, like 6 years in Poland. And our role is to support energy transition. So we are a think tank. We formulate, or we try to identify barriers for the energy transition, and then we deliver solutions. So we have the privilege of working with the major European foundations, and in this context, we can also work with most knowledgeable people in Poland, in Europe, with external consultants. So our team is around 10 people now, a little more. But then we can work with best consultants in Europe, like yours, Hans, Aurora. We work together. So this is why we are very agile, and because the situation in the energy sector is very dynamic, particularly in Poland. This is my impression. So we need to find the answer to the most and diverse also questions which emerge. Our main focus is on the power energy markets, renewables development, the whole economic and technical aspects of operation of the energy system in transition. including security of supply. And of course, decarbonization is the lead topic. So our aim is to support decarbonization of the energy system. And also we develop now, since 2 years, we are working also on clean heat, which mainly means that we support the decision on phasing out coal from the single households, because Poland still burns a lot of coal in households, which leads to heavy air pollution. This is one topic, but also district heating systems are facing different troubles. So to some extent also energy efficiency is important part of our business, because without energy efficiency, clean heating would be very expensive. And this is, let's say, our major focus. We also, since a few months, we work also on integration of electromobility into the power system with some partners. And this is our, let's say, background, and our team is diverse, so we have people coming from the energy sector, from the public administration, and also from science, and this I think that's it.
No, very interesting. So you cover the whole breadth of the energy transition, really. Before we get into a lot of the topics you mentioned, actually, I'm just interested in how your work changed over the past couple of years. You mentioned you started 6 years ago. You were formally incorporated 4 years ago, and at least in my impression, the energy transition has picked up steam massively, or in this time. So how has this affected your work?
It's a very good question and interesting one, because indeed we talked recently about that 6 years ago we didn't even know where to start, because energy transition, some people told me even you shouldn't mention energy transition because it's unpopular. And then talking about coal future was also unpopular. Renewables were perceived as a threat to the energy system. So we were actually, let's say 6 years ago, we were totally avant-garde of the Polish energy discussion. And meanwhile, the situation has changed. And it's really great to observe it, to see it, that from being in avant-garde, we moved to the mainstream, where suddenly, particularly this year, it started already last year, everybody started to talk about renewables, that this is the future of Poland. And a lot has changed, because also the very, very interesting subsidy schemes for rooftop PV. So Poles were in love with renewables. Everybody now installs PV on its roof, and this is really extremely extreme development. It's like the share, we install about 4 megawatt of PV daily, which means that the growth of PV on year to year was 170%. Of course, the starting point was really small, because 3 years ago we have something like 200 megawatt of PV. Now we have above 2.5 gigawatt of PV, and this is really something which changed the perception, in my view, on renewables. And meanwhile, also onshore wind was perceived as a better than before, because we had these changes in the past, distance regulation and so on. So now everybody is talking about renewables, hydrogen, and about 2030, 2050. Of course, not everybody is very much enthusiastic, and some of the decision makers still, they want to delay this process, or there is no consensus, in my view, political consensus, particularly in the government, on the need of energy transition. But nevertheless, discussion, debate, it's still part of all politics in the world. So but nevertheless, utilities, they want to do green investments, and So I think it's turnover. It's like completely new situation in which we are now.
Excellent. Okay, and there's a couple of topics we'll discuss in more detail in a second. So, but before we do that, not all of our listeners will be familiar with the Polish power market. So, can you perhaps give us a very brief introduction about where the market stands right now? Because I think a lot of people associate Poland with coal, and is that still the case? Is that changing? Where do we stand there?
Coal is still the king, however, it's losing its kingdom and crown a little. This is my impression. In fact, when we talk about energy mix, coal still dominates. We have 73% of coal, or we had actually December last year, of coal in total, because we have lignite and hard coal. However, the pandemic and fast falling demand for electricity has actually pushed out coal-fired power plants out of the merit order. So all in all, we have now around 70% of coal in the power mix, and there is fast actually growing share of gas. And this is around 7% now in the electricity mix, and then the rest is basically renewables, around 12-13% of renewables, and also some industrial energy sources. And this is our power mix, so it's very undiversified, so it's mainly based on coal.
Okay, but coal, of course, as you said, is struggling economically. It was struggling even before the COVID pandemic. What does this mean politically? Because I mean, one of the big issues in the market, as I understand it, is that a lot of the coal is mined domestically. There's a lot of jobs associated with this. So managing this transition away from coal is a big issue politically. How's the government approaching this?
Indeed, I mean the reason why Poland is so much reliant on coal, it was primarily extraction, own production. So it was not even for our own purposes, but also in the communism time, coal was one of the export goods, and for years there was big tradition with mining and with the profession itself, which was perceived as very much important one for the economy, for the energy security, and so on. And things have started to change because production of coal is falling year by year, and this is a process which started already 20 years ago. And now we face the situation when Poland is not able anymore to cover very high domestic demand with own coal extraction. And around 2 years ago, there was a lot of coal imported to Poland. I mean, the process have started, and decision makers noticed suddenly that, relying on coal does not mean necessarily energy independence, because in the most, let's say, last year we saw the periods where almost 1/3 of coal was imported. 20 million ton of coal was imported, mainly from Russia, by the way. Mm-hmm. And this has caused, I think this was one of the reasons why energy transition became as a solution. So we need to diversify our energy mix, because coal production will go down because of many reasons. There are many reasons, like geology. I mean, the coal is deep in the ground, above 1 kilometer, which means that the extraction costs are very high, and also because of the labor cost. Polish economy is doing quite well, even now, still compared to other countries. So the wages are raising, and also coal miners, they want to earn good money. And this all together, it makes Polish coal very uncompetitive compared to the imported coal. There is also, when we talk about quality of coal, Polish coal is also has poorer quality compared to Russian coal, in example. This is why, in example, heating sector prefers imported coal over domestic one, and this became very political issues. Decision makers, they even try to push utilities to buy Polish coal, but it is, actually not very welcome, because it's more expensive and the quality is poor. So this is contributing to this changing landscape of the discussion about energy transition.
You mentioned the utilities. How are they coping with this transformation? The way I view the world is that all the big utilities are loss making in the near term, because they're posting they're posting big deficits because the profitability of the coal plants and the coal power plants has declined so much. But at the same time, they have to be financing huge investments into new capacities, both gas and renewable. So how are they coping with this, and what do you see as a potential way forward for them?
Indeed, but actually, utilities mainly they will see losses in the segment of conventional generation. I mean, generation from coal. They can still make profits when it comes to the distribution. So just one remark to what you have said. But of course, I mean, now Poland has a capacity market, which means actually a support scheme for coal-fired power plant, but it will expire in 2025. And we have different analyses about the situation that after 2025, many of the coal-fired power plants, they will start to bring immediately big losses. And we expect that around 9 to 10 gigawatt of capacities after 2025, they will not bring profits anymore. And utilities, they know they have now this, let's say, period like 5 years to repair the situation. So what they are planning now, the hot topic in the Polish debate is separating toxic coal assets from rest of the business, because in terms of what you said, the big challenges ahead of Polish energy transition, they have difficulties in obtaining the financing. Banks, they don't want to give them loans once they have coal assets in their business. So this is one of the most important topics now in the discussion. We also, they also speak a lot about new strategy. And if you take a look on different companies, you see actually almost only renewables. They see future in renewables. By the way, this week, Orlen, which is biggest Polish oil company, announced that they want to reach climate neutrality, which was quite new and quite surprising because it was not announced before. But Orlen wants to be carbon neutral, so it's like new in the debate, because officially Poland still didn't adopt this climate neutrality target, at least in the opinion of some decision makers. So this is something which is really like happening. I think that utilities, they struggle sometimes to convince politicians that they are more, prepared for energy transition than the mindset of some of the politicians. So they are also, I know, working hard to convince politicians that we have to be more progressive. So developing new business energy strategy, new business models is also something which lies on the table. There are also different mergers foreseen in the Polish energy system. So utilities, they want to merge, and there is a plan to create one big multi-energy company, but it's still ongoing process.
What I find quite interesting is that the industry is moving ahead of government there. The utilities are kind of pushing government to get more ambitious. What are the main forces that are holding back government? I would assume the mining unions are quite powerful. What other, or is that also your impression? And what other forces are there holding back the energy transition?
If you ask me what is holding back the energy transition in Poland, I think it's really like fear, actually, that we will not manage, that the cost will be too high, and to some extent, I think also miners have their say, because they are really very powerful. You can observe it also these days when they because this week Ministry of Climate introduced state energy policy, where the share of coal will decline in future more than previously assumed, and then actually only coal miners can comment on this. This is at least my impression, that other industries are not taking part in the debates, only coal miners, and of course they want to get as much as possible. And I mean mainly trade unions. It's maybe not all miners are the same, let's say, and have so much demands. But this is, I think, the lack of knowledge also. So a little fear, as I said, lack of conviction that we will manage, lack of belief, and then also, I think, cost barrier, like, awareness that we will need to take those costs on our back. However, I must say I took part recently in a debate, interesting debate, and with also one of the politicians, and the politicians say that Poland cannot afford energy transition, at least yet, because costs are so high, and it will increase energy poverty. And there was very interesting reply from one of the panelists who said that you say about the cost like we cannot, like there would be an alternative. We need to take this cost anyhow, because the old system just expired. So the major reason why we need to make energy transition is because conventional units, I mean, our generation power plants are just very old, and about 50% of coal-fired power plants are older than 30 years old. So we need to invest anyhow in new generation. Mm-hmm. And this is the key issue now, what the investment will be. Mm-hmm. Would it be renewables, gas, or nuclear power plant?
Yeah, and we perhaps we can we'll come to nuclear in the end, and whether we see that feasible. But before that, actually, you mentioned the cost aspect and the question of whether it can be done, whether Poland will manage. And actually, these two questions, they formed a pretty big part of a study you recently released on phasing out lignite, in particular in what you call Europe's lignite triangle. So Poland, mm-hmm. The Czech Republic, and Germany. And we were very very lucky to be able to support you with the modeling on this. What would you say were the main takeaways from your side from this study, and how is it influencing the debate?
The major takeaway was that lignite phase out is just inevitable. Once you can still speak about how fast you will phase out hard coal. You can, once you don't have own production, you can import it. You can bring it from Russia, Colombia, if you like. I mean, if there is political decision and if it all, let's say, sticks economically. But nevertheless, when we talk about lignite will expire. Existing lignite mines will expire within 10 to 13 years. It means that, and there is no consensus. Local societies they don't want to have new lignite mines, new lignite mines. It means that there will be a huge gap in the Polish generation system within the next 10 years, around 8 gigawatts of capacity. So this is something which just as said, it's not, and once the lignite mine will expire, the production from the lignite power plants will go sharply down. And we need to plan this process, we need to fill that gap. And our intention to do this study was not only focus on Poland, but to see regionally how it works in Germany and Czech Republic, Czechia, because these are three countries which still produce a lot of lignite. And by the way, in the Polish debate, always German coal-fired power plants, they play a huge role. So once we talk about phasing out coal, politicians they and also experts, they mention German new coal-fired power plants, Hambacher Forst, and new lignite mines, new plants coming into the system. So it is, and I know also in Germany the same. I mean, in Germany also politicians they speak about Polish coal, and this is why we came to the conclusion that we need to launch it and incentivize the process that the lignite or coal phase out will be done synchronically.
You mentioned a really interesting point, that the amount of kind of cross-country finger pointing that is going on there. In the German coal exit discussion, you always have the arguments, well, but then all this coal-powered electricity will come from Poland, and probably vice versa, and or the Polish debate points at Hambacher Forst and Datteln 4 and these kind of things.
Yes.
So and I think that's one of the really interesting things to come out of this. That yes, it is possible, kind of for the three major lignite producing and lignite firing countries in Central Europe to get rid of this together without the costs spiraling out of control and without the lights going out.
This is what we wanted to check, how it impacts interconnected energy power system in Europe, because it's a regional thing, but of course actually the impact would be even bigger. So from our perspective, exactly the outcome was that the light will not be off once concrete action will be taken now, because it means that we can fill this gap with renewables and a little gas, because Poland still does not have any actually gas peaker. So for the flexibility, it is the challenge. So it's still possible to make this transition happen, and also we wanted to take a look on not only focus on the 2050, because I think everything at that point of time will be possible, but I think that the 2030 perspective, 2035 is now a very important one. In Poland, particularly, I really think without an action, we will face troubles with generation in a few years' time with balancing.
Yes, absolutely, and this is actually the perfect segue to the last set of topics that wanted to talk about, because obviously a lot of the listeners to this podcast are international or work for international utilities, investors, and so forth, and are looking at this primarily with the perspective of the opportunities that are arising for this transition, and what can be built to replace coal. And maybe to start with renewables, because from my perspective, and obviously we are advising a lot of investors and utilities now entering this market, and renewables developers. This is Poland right now is one of the hottest markets for renewables. Actually, let's perhaps start with offshore, offshore wind, which seems to be everybody's darling, and the government has announced quite ambitious build-out targets. How much do you think can realistically be built, and what kind of contribution can it make to the energy mix?
In the this week published state energy policy, we see the number of 5.9 gigawatt until 2030. And according to our analysis on the offshore potential, it's quite a low number. I still think that around 9 gigawatt is possible until 2030, sorry. But of course, everything depends on how quickly the government will act. So there is now offshore law in the pipeline, so it should be adopted until end of the year. And I know that actually the conditions which are foreseen in this offshore act or law are quite favorable for the development of offshore wind. But many things need to be also cleared regards spatial planning, and also grids are to some extent challenged. But I think 9 gigawatts until 2030 is possible. Everything depends on the two projects now which are most advanced. This is the PGE and Forum Energia. They are, let's say, leaders because they done some work in the past. So they are now leading this process, but then the rest will follow. Indeed, I think offshore is now perceived as darling. As you said, everybody loves offshore. All the utilities are talking about offshore, that this is a major point of their strategy.
Very interesting. So, I mean, 9 gigawatts would be huge, because that would also mean a lot of construction in a very short time, right? So the first projects are scheduled to go online in 2026, if I recall correctly. So actually, that would be that would require a very rapid ramp up in the second half of the 2020s.
It is ambitious, but as I said, I hope that the decision makers will enable this process and speed up this process, because after 2025, in my view, Poland will face generation gaps, and I think offshore can cover this gap. To contribute, at least.
Very interesting. Maybe let's talk next about onshore wind, because this has made quite a big comeback over the past 2 years with the first CFD auctions that were held. But the industry is now, or at least my impression is that the industry is facing now a bit of a break, because all the old projects have, or most of the old projects have been awarded CFDs, and new development is still being held back by the 10H distance rule, which basically sets a minimum distance to human settlements for any wind parks, and massively reduces the sites that are available. Can you tell us a bit more about this debate, and whether you agree with our expectation actually that this will be lifted over the next couple of months?
This is what has been announced by the government, the relaxation of the distance rule, new regulation. It's still quite not 100% sure on how the new regulation will be designed, because certainly some rules will remain, but indeed, without relaxation of the rule, the development of onshore wind won't be possible. What is not maybe, what is salt in an eye is announcement of the reshuffling of the government. And then we will see what the outcome will be. It should come in the next weeks. So I hope it will not impact this actually promise made by the government that it should happen within weeks, actually, this change of rules for onshore wind. Because as you said, without, actually last year was very, Poland was, I think, third biggest onshore wind market in Europe, but this was because of actually new auctions, and these were actually old projects, which was put on hold for some while, and then they all, took part in the auction. So it was quite good, but without changes, onshore wind will not fly. And it has different important role to play in the Polish energy transition.
Very interesting, thank you. And then finally, among the intermittent renewables, solar. You already mentioned in the beginning of the podcast that rooftop solar is booming, and really everyone who has a roof is currently is interested in getting this. Maybe two questions on this. Do you on the rooftop solar? Is there a danger of the market overheating and of basically, or of government just saying, okay, this is getting too expensive, the support for this, and we're reducing the support for rooftop solar? And then second question would be on utility scale solar, which we hear of massive projects being developed in the hundreds of megawatts. How do you see that moving forward? Is that do you think they can make a big contribution to the market as well?
So 2 points. The first one, whether the market can be overheated. I think such danger exists, frankly speaking. However, today there was a letter of agreement signed between the solar industry and the Polish climate ministry, which is a kind of promise that, about the stability of the development of the sector, because I think everybody had it in the back that one day the rules can change. At least until end of the year, the funds are preserved. For the subsidy for the rooftop PV installations, and for the next year, I didn't hear any voice that it will be abandoned or limited. However, we live now in a little unpredictable times, so I would not exclude it if you ask me entirely. And when it comes to the utility scale PV, auctions for this year are announced, and this is something where I know huge interest from companies is coming, and projects are developed. So I think that what is the major, let's say, factor why PV, I don't think will die one day in Poland. This is because Polish power system really needs PV. We have major challenge with covering our summer peak, where conventional power plants, they face a lot of limits and troubles with delivering capacity. And this is why at least I think 6 to 7 gigawatts are just emergency for the Polish power system. And this is something where I think everybody who plans investments should take into account that regulation may change, but still there is a need, coming from the power system, and also great enthusiasm. It's just really something which you just feel in the debates. The mood has completely changed within 2 years on PV.
and people don't object to living close to a solar farm then as much as to living next to a wind park. I gather, at least that's the German experience so far.
Exactly.
So before we come to my final question, which is more about the investment environment, I would like to hear from you about natural gas, because this has for long been a very controversial topic, and it's been unpopular with the government to use natural gas in the power sector. On the other hand, as you said, there's really no economically viable way to keep the coal plants open, or at least to keep most of the coal plants open beyond the next couple of years. And something dispatchable will have to come into the system, and it will probably be natural gas. So do you see a lot of appetite from investors, from utilities, to build new gas plants?
Oh yes, you can see now a great enthusiasm towards gas. It's quite interesting for me personally, because I saw huge reluctance in the past, like no gas, no Russian gas, and now everybody, all utilities, because you have to remember that on one hand we need gas for the power system, but on the other for the heating system. So there is competition between heating and power system for gas. And of course, it's also, quite late to invest in gas because of the first reason is because of the technologies which exist and which can make us really independent from gas imports, because still Polish gas is mainly imported gas. We use yearly now around 80 billion cubic meter of gas, and around 4 is produced domestically, and the rest is coming 50% of the imports from Russia. There is LNG and Germany direction, and Norwegian gas. So indeed, the enthusiasm toward gas is coming from the diversification of the gas imports, which is real. But nevertheless, my impression is it's just too late. I mean, we have neutrality targets in 2050, and still we want to avoid lock-in gas. I mean, moving away from coal, we cannot, stay with gas only, because it is not solution. But actually, we will publish quite soon the analysis on 2030 perspective, and we see that some gas probably is needed. As said, we do not have flexible peakers in the Polish power system. And we expect that we need around 1 to 2 gigawatts of gas-fired power plants. Actually, if we would build 3 gigawatts, the third gigawatt would operate only few hours a year, if it would be the case. So we should really think about gas very sparingly when it comes to the power system. But it's everything now depends on the regulation on the EPS, which is emission performance standards limits, but also on the solutions. But solution is actually already there. So we invest in renewables. Maybe biomass have also still some potential once it is produced locally. And still, we have a lot of flexibility in grids, and DSR is also, Poland made quite good experiences with the DSR in the recent years. And we still have a lot of coal for the next conventional power plants, which can run flexibly in the next, let's say, 10 to 15 years. And then future is green hydrogen. Which is, in my view, also quite promising in terms of the cost developments, and in the context that Poland would go or should go for renewables in the next years. Green hydrogen, in my view, will play a role in the Polish power system.
And the government has announced a hydrogen strategy for the beginning of next year, correct?
Yes, there is a new person, plenipotentiary, dealing with hydrogen strategy for the government, and some announcements should come in the next year. Also, utilities are preparing to jump in to this thinking.
So yeah, that's certainly one to watch. As a final question, I want to maybe zoom out a little bit and pass on one question to you, which we actually get regularly from international companies who are thinking about becoming active in Poland, and kind of they look at some of the instances of how the Polish government has treated international developers and investors in the past, and are a little bit concerned about the investment environment, basically, and also the regulatory security of their investments. What would be your answer to those concerns? Is this time really different when it comes to investing in the Polish power sector?
It's really a difficult question you ask, because nobody can guarantee that the politics will not deliver any surprising developments. Like, politics is only politics. But nevertheless, I think that the difference compared to the last years is that renewables were perceived in the past as addition to the, let's say, it's something which is expensive, it's quite pushed by the European Union, and it's quite disturbing. It was like Uber for the energy sector. Now I think renewables are seen seriously as a pillar of the Polish power system. So this is, in my view, the difference compared to the past. So I don't expect that reasonable politicians would like to bring more risk to the business, because everything should now focus on attracting investment in Poland. Also because utilities, Polish domestic companies, they are struggling with different, with financing, with divesting coal assets, with also district heating, which they own. And in my view, everything should go into direction of attracting investors to come to Poland. But as said, politics is only politics.
Okay, I think that's a very good note to close on. Thank you very much, Joanna, for joining us for what was really a tour de force around the status and future of the Polish power sector. Extremely interesting. I've certainly learned a lot. Yes, we hope we can continue our very good exchange and together hopefully influence a lot of these decisions in the right direction in the future.
Thank you very much, Hans, for the invitation. It was my pleasure to talk with you, and I hope I created a positive picture about and interesting picture about what's going on in Poland at the moment.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That was Hanns Koenig, who leads the consulting business of Aurora in Central Europe, speaking to Joanna Maćkowiak-Pandera, founder and president of Forum Energii. Do keep an eye on our podcast feed for more in-depth conversations with senior members of the energy industry. The best way to do this is to subscribe on whatever platform you use. Thanks for listening, and goodbye.